I'm Philip Saville, and I directed Harold Pinter's first play for television in 1960, A Night Out. In the 60s, the world of TV drama was a wonderful time. The productions all went out live, and all the cameras and the actors all had to be perfectly rehearsed.
Hello there, thought you were never getting here. Put your things up there, would you? All the things on the top, lovely. Hello, boy.
Having shared the same era and a similar background to Harold, I decided to look up some mutual friends and search out what made him tick.
Passing the Tower of London, 5,000 fascists rally to their mobilization for the much advertised march.
I actually had physical fights with these number of these people, and we were very, very well much aware of them. They were pretty brutal, violent lot, and I detested their anti-Semitism and saw what they did to actually old people, which they're old Jews, whom they'd casually beat up.
We used to hear the drums of Mosley's gangs marching, and when you heard the drums, it sent really, you know, almost like icy chills going through you. And there was a sense of horror. And people always said that, oh, when Hitler comes, you'll be the one to go, you know, they'll get you. My father was a tailor, and his father also was a ladies' tailor. And the East End was alive and very, very stimulating with all these different people and races from all over Europe and Russia and Romania, the post-war Jews that settled there.
There was this juxtaposition of the completely modern, post-war, forward-looking, integrated, trying to be Jewish people calling their children Henry and Harold, and Jeremy and Stephen and Michael and Charles. Those people did not want to be Avram and Moshe and you know, Yitzchak and took Hebrew, and they wanted to be English.
In fact, nearly every major Jewish writer had a tailor for a father. And there's a kind of interesting significance that the tailor cuts out the material to create a whole piece. And a writer cuts out material from words, equally a mass of words and material, and sews together a play. But in those days, to have a craft was regarded as somehow low, that you didn't have intellectual ability, that you were just working in a sweatshop.
Around every corner there was somebody who hated you or might kill you, or all sorts of deep-rooted anxieties which Harold inherited, in my view.
I mean, I myself certainly didn't have an idyllic childhood. I haven't told you how morbid I was as a little boy. I was also very lonely, if you really want to know the truth, and because I was an only child.
So in the young child was a frustration because he inherited the genes to create and cut a piece of material. So he ended up writing and cutting out the play.
I was evacuated in late 1939. I'd never really seen the sea before, but the sea was extraordinary, and the countryside I had really never seen either. One friend I had there was told one day that his parents and baby sister all had been killed, bombed in London. No one could really understand what that meant. We were isolated, and occasionally the war would hit, like a Messerschmitt would actually come over the coast, you know, followed by Spitfires. It was a sense of unreality, starkness of the sea and the shore, and somewhere a very violent world going on, a very violent war.
We both went to the same school, the Hackney Downs Grammar School. I had to go there because I'd won a scholarship and I had to go to the nearest London school by the county council or one of those things. And that was a school where Harold Pinter went to. But I think he's 2 years older than me, So he was further up. So, you know, you never meet the older boys when you're young. They don't talk to the younger boys.
I knew of him through the same teacher. We had the same English teacher, Joseph Brearley.
He woke us all up, and he introduced us to John Webster, you know, and the whole Jacobean playwrights and poets. We really didn't know much about it. We knew Shakespeare, but we didn't know anyone else. Oh, yes, that was the only way I saw I could possibly earn a living, you know, when I was 19, 20. And I did for about 10 years. I worked in rep. I was out of work a good deal, of course, but I worked very hard in weekly rep, which was then all over the country.
If you're in weekly rep or fortnightly rep, you have to forget the lines you learnt last week, remember the lines of the play that you're now doing, and try and learn the lines for next week too. So it was a very hard job.
This actor, David Barron, was playing part of a waiter in The Matchmaker, a tiny part, about 2-3 lines. And he had this rather glamorous wife, this little baby. Gerald Flood, who was our leading man, had appendicitis, acute appendicitis, and been rushed to hospital. David Barron said, well, actually, I played this part 6 weeks ago in Scunthorpe. And David Barron went on and was really, really good on the first night and played the rest of the week. And, of course, it was only later that I learned that David Barron was Harold Pinter.
Vivian, his wife, who was a superb actress, I have to say, she was quite genteel, she was quite proper.
But I always remember her telling me, watching me make up and saying, Susannah, you must never rub your eyes like that, you'll get wrinkles.
But incredibly sexy underneath that. We had a lot of laughs together, but I never really quite knew. She was quite enigmatic, as indeed was Harold.
He was married to Vivian Merchant, who I knew, and I'd done something with on television. I think that's how I met. I met her husband.
As David Barron, not Harold Pinter, he was not a bit pompous about it. He was learning his trade as an actor, just as I was.
I've always been very interested and learnt a lot as an actor in my early days of a sense of an audience. And it's great fun to see who's going to be the boss, you or them, really.
Well, I liked him very much. I liked him in his own writing. I saw him in The Homecoming. I'm not sure when he sort of got to play sort of character parts of Toffs towards the end, that was his best thing. But he had a sort of wonderful menace.
He had a real presence.
I was always very good at sinister parts, they used to tell me.
Yeah, I seem to remember he was quite good at detectives.
I think he was good-ish.
David was playing the nasty father, you know, and I thought he was dreadful. I thought he was so embarrassingly bad.
Not a great actor in those days, but he became a much better actor as he got older.
Excellent actor. Astonishingly good.
On one occasion, we raced through a play in order to get out to the pubs before they closed, because it was quite a long play. And some of us all rushed out to have a drink when we could. I don't remember Pinter following.
And you'd ask where he was, and Vivian would say, he's writing. And I thought, oh, what a pretentious prat. You know, what is he writing, this bad actor?
All actors were going to write plays. I was friends with John Osborne, an actor. He said he was going to write a play, and you go, oh, yeah.
I think even then, as a young man, he must have despised some of the work that we were doing and probably did just do it.
He took the trade very seriously.
He had to be intellectual. He was a Cockney from the wrong end of town. I mean, he really wanted to be a great writer. My play, as you see, is written by Harold Pinter. I said, is that, you know, you got that name for writing? He said, no, he said, that's my real name. When did you write this play then, David? How'd you get time? You're in rep. He said, I had a week off. And it was kind of Ramsgate or Margate, he said, and one of those, you know, that's not necessarily accurate, but the English seaside place, they were at that. And he said, I had a week off. I wasn't in the play that week. He said, and I sat on Vivian was in it. He said, and I sat on the beach and I wrote this play. And I said, well, what is it about? I said, because I'm in it and I don't know. He said, I wrote it and I don't know.
The Birthday Party and The Dumb Waiter and The Hot House, which I wrote ages ago, are all political plays. I understood that to be the case at the time.
It's about two Cockney gangsters, The Dumb Waiter. And I thought, why aren't I in that? You know, I would be perfect for the bigger one. You know, there's a big one and a little one. And I thought that would be fantastic, because The Dumb Waiter, one of the funniest plays I've ever seen. There's a piece in The Dumb Waiter where they're in the disused basement of a restaurant, and they have a dumb waiter, you know, for the food to go up and down and everything. And it's disused. They're waiting for someone to come, and they're going to kill him, these two gangsters. And they're waiting there, and suddenly the dumb waiter comes down. And of course they pull their guns, and there's nothing there. And they look, and he said, "What's that?" And it's a piece of paper. And they take the piece of paper, and one says, "What does it say?" He says, "It says, soup of the day, liver and onions, jam tart." And so these two gangsters are looking at each other, I mean, very tough killers. And they go, "What should we do?" He said, "We'd better send something up." So he said, "Well, we haven't got liver, soup of the day." You know, he said, "Well, what have you got?" He said, and he's got this bag. He says, "I've got an Eccles cake." So he said, "You got an Eccles cake?" He says, "Yeah." He said, "How many?" He says, "One." He says, "You mean you didn't bring me an Eccles cake?" So this is all... I would love to film that.
I think you did almost.
I've just done it. Yeah, and I think that dialogue's right. I remember his lines better than I remember mine.
What do you think?
He'll be here soon.
I know.
So stop arsing about.
Yes. I will. What time's he getting here? Oi! What time is he getting here?
What time are they getting here?
Is he bringing them?
Why not?
What time?
What's the matter with you? Could be any time. What were we told to do?
Wait here.
And what are we doing?
Waiting here.
I think you're right.
A terrible disaster with my first professional production, The Birthday Party, which the critics hated and which failed totally. It was an absolute catastrophe and came off in a week.
But there are enough people to recognise it as a new and daring and inventive work.
And then, thank God, Harold Hobson saved it. But unfortunately, by that time, the play was off.
Even if he believed in something that was completely out of fashion, as he often was out of fashion or out of kilter, he had the sort of strength of his own convictions to believe. I'm not saying that I was like that, but I just admired that.
He, probably as many of us did, saw what the theatre was in those days, which was beautifully middle class, elegantly written, and has now got a big revival, of course, but pandering really to a class of people that used it in a way to support and to assuage their lifestyle.
He was just so new after people like Rattigan and Coward.
What he's captured in Goldberg is this social aspiration that has become self-destructive. That's what I believe. That, you know, Daddy says you wear a blazer, you join the right clubs, you go to the right tea house, you behave nicely to ladies, you become English.
How interesting that even in an earlier work, he made the Jew something under whom other characters suffered.
What drives Goldberg is this will to conform, to will to follow the observations, which is very Jewish, but it's very British.
You had this poor chap, Stanley, who was victimised and abused and ridiculed. And this made the drama of showing what people are in society and how, in a way, they can be so cruel and intemperate and vicious for no reason than the victim tolerates it.
Instruments of personal sexual fantasy in his briefcase. Now, that's what the briefcase is for. There's a big debate. Does he torture the girl upstairs in the room? Does he tie her to the bed and beat her? You can't avoid these questions because they're spoken about in the play.
Whereas a lot of my contemporary friends, even now, were saying to me after the show, but what does it mean? that not one of the young people said that. They understand horror and they understand that sort of humour. And it meant something different to all of them, and that was all right.
I've gathered you here now as representatives of a new generation, young actors, writers and directors, to discuss the impact of Pinter.
He was his own man, his own creation, and his plays sort of stand alone in their own little world.
The writing is so good, and the flow for an actor, once you really start to make your own choices, make your own backstories up. Like in The Dumb Waiter, you can literally take these two characters and you can place them, the backstory could be about anything.
Lots of photographers out there.
And they care about us.
How the hell they won't?
Yesterday's news.
What's that? What's that?
I don't know.
Where did it come from?
Under the door.
What is it?
Don't know.
Pick it up.
No.
Yes?
You pick it up.
What do you mean?
You pick it up.
Well, the play I'm most fond of, and I think it is certainly one of his best, if not the best, is The Caretaker.
The man who wrote this play understood something about dirty old lofts, drips coming through the roof, rats running around in blocks of flats, and the aspirational mental state to not let any of that determine who you are.
And it's always a revelation when you play Pinter how funny it is.
And of course, Pinter is very funny. It's often black humour and it's often shocking humour, but he's very funny.
You get into this great dark hole during rehearsals and you're in all this psychosis, and then you do it and suddenly the audience roar with laughter.
I said the first couple of lines very straight and I thought very dramatically, and the audience just fell about laughing. And I remember looking down to Warren and he looked up at me and winked and said, "It's funny."
Some of the dialogue is very comical because it's kind of people's streams of consciousness, conversations, arguments.
The ordinariness and then
the ordinariness of
repetition
it.
of them.
Very much the repetition of it too, yeah.
It's a funny idea of a character who just takes everything incredibly serious and is unsure about any set rules in life. So it's just like, you want a Kit Kat? Are you sure you want a Kit Kat?
Yeah.
Why did you want the Kit Kat?
You don't know what your trouble is. That's your trouble.
Yeah, exactly.
What does it say?
They'll be here for us in 2 minutes.
2 minutes?
2 minutes.
Show it to me. 2 minutes. They'll be here for us in 2 minutes.
Well, 1 minute 40 now.
Minute 45.
Oh, 5 seconds.
You always were a little bit fast.
And you always were a little bit slow.
Fast or slow, it's the same bloody 2 minutes.
Not 2 minutes. Tell them go to hell with it. 2 minutes. Go on.
So dark though as well, because I went to see the Hot House when it was on at the National, and I just thought it was hilarious, but in a quite sort of dark, chilling way.
A certain chill at the centre of a lot of his work.
Had a bad dream. You dream a lot?
Only on match days.
2 men knocked at my door. White coats wearing football boots. Grabbed me by the collar, dragged me down the corridor.
Yeah.
You seen this?
What?
It's us 2 years ago.
Yeah.
We look good. We were good.
You know, I heard someone broke in here once.
What?
A man, he wanted to meet the team. He just bought a kit at the gift shop and walked straight in.
You what?
He walked straight in, past the security guards and everything. And they thought he was a player.
Go on.
That's what I heard.
Get away.
No, it's It's unbelievable,
Sorry,
isn't it?
walk right in.
Yeah, a man of 64, I mean, dressed like us. They thought he was us.
That's unbelievable.
Sure enough.
That's incredible.
You know what he said?
Who?
The man.
What, the 64?
The 64-year-old man.
What?
When he saw this place, you know what he said?
What?
What a shithole!
I bet his mum's covering his ear for him, eh? Yeah. You ever met her, Seeley? Who? His mother. Yeah. What's she like, eh? She's all right. All right, is she? I told you, I just said she was all right. No, what I mean is, he always gets a bit niggly when she's mentioned, doesn't he? A bit touchy, you notice that? Yeah. Well, why's that then? I don't know. What you asking me for? Well, I don't know. I thought you might sort of... Well, I mean, you know him better than I do, don't you? Of course, he doesn't let much slip, does he, old Albert? No, not much. He's a bit deep, really, isn't he? Yeah, he's a bit deep. Secretive. What do you mean, secretive? What are you talking about? Well, I was just saying he's secretive. What are you talking about? What do you mean he's secretive? Well, you said yourself he was deep. I said he was deep. I didn't say he was secretive.
I thought it was terrific. And it had all that menace and danger, or the beginnings of it.
Did you direct one of those?
Yes.
Yeah, I thought you did.
Yes, A Night Out.
Yeah. Yeah, you did, didn't you? And it was a landmark television production. She was, well, talking about the sexual thing, I mean, you brought that out very, very much, didn't you?
Good evening. What you doing? What you doing out at this time of night? I live just round the corner. Like to? Chilly out here, isn't it?
Vivian and I were very good friends because we'd done The Room, and then I suggested her for that part in Alfie, and Lewis said, I'll give her a screen test, and she wouldn't do a screen test. Vivian said, no, I won't do a screen test. And he said, your friend Vivian Merchant won't do a screen test. I said, sod the screen test. I said, give it to her, I promise you. I said, she'll be fantastic.
Vivian was his wife and, in a very real sense, was his muse. She understood his rhythms. She understood his evasiveness. She understood, above all, I think, his irony and his humour.
There was a lot of revolutionary things happening. I mean, Joan Littlewood was a revolution at Stratford East. The Royal Court was doing revolution in a different way.
There was a kind of post-60s freedom, an attitude that to be bold, daring, push the envelope, go way out.
I beg your pardon, who do you suppose I am?
Why, you're the torturer, of course.
Do you really think I look like a torturer?
The nihilism of all the other things going on in the world and bombs and da-da-da-da. This was someone who was able to negotiate this territory with poise and wit.
His themes of threat and power and sex, particularly from a man's point of view. I'm not sure he was as astute at understanding women.
I haven't generally felt a great warmth towards women in his plays.
about me taking a glass without you taking me?
Why don't I just take you?
The only woman in the play and the only bringer of femininity into a violently, repulsively male world.
The character of Ruth is subjected to the usual, but Lenny particularly tries to do his usual Lenny number on women, which is to try and terrify the life out of them. And she's having none of it because she's completely unfazed by it, because as you eventually discover, she's from the same background.
You've forgotten something. Look at me. I move my leg. That's all it is. But I wear underwear, which moves with me. It captures your attention. Perhaps you misinterpret. The action is simple. It's a leg, moving. My lips move. Why don't you restrict your observations to that?
The savage dance of needs between people.
It doesn't have a trace of sentiment in it. It's very unblinking in its analysis of the cruelties we inflict on each other, even in a family.
Although their marriage ended disastrously, sadly, she is there in his plays. The woman that I knew is there in his plays. I mean, made theatrical, but the kind of genteel sexiness that she had, he catches marvellously in those women.
His screenplays were superb constructions.
Harold Pinter's not only a great dramatist, he's one of the best screenwriters in the business.
He could put away all those, cases full of dynamite and squibs and just relax and then be extraordinarily sensitive to other people's material.
Harold's, how should I say, meanness, you might almost say, of dialogue was actually his great virtue.
Of course, he was starting with screenplays like The Servant, which made that film quite unusual. You thought, my God, what writer has written this? And of course, it wasn't Pinter. It was based on another novelist, Robin Moore.
She was cast first. I mean, I think they almost set the film up because Sarah was a hot young actress. I'd only been out of the army a couple of years when I made that film with her, and we were very close at the time, and I think that really helps the chemistry. This script had enormous sexual impact. I mean, Harold is not ambiguous about that, and this was a very rare thing to read and recognize yourself in the way he wrote about relationships, the way he wrote about your feelings, and he wrote about that struggle between two human beings. It was just very raw and very real.
14-12. There's no reason to take advantage of the fact that you're sitting in the best position.
My dear...
You ought to be able to play the game according to the rules.
My dear Barrett, you're just a little upset because you're losing the game.
Oh. Take your ball.
Take it yourself.
And sexual subtext was very much there, of course, with him. The whole ambiguity of that relationship between him and Vera, and Tony and Vera, and Tony and him.
His work was about power and the power which people have over each other.
The subtext of class warfare, yes, I think that was there very much.
I don't know what I'd do without you. Well, go and pour me a glass of brandy. Well, that's what I suggested in the first place. But don't just stand there, go and do it!
It was very important for him to learn how to take a theatrical concept and broaden it for the cinema. He knew exactly how to behave as a writer on the set, and he never intruded. But, of course, the one thing he was so particular about as a writer was that no actor would ever change a word.
I hadn't seen him for years. I can't pretend I was his closest friend and round his home for dinner every week. I wasn't. But what happened was he wrote the remake of Sleuth that I did, and we rehearsed that for 2 weeks. And he was at every rehearsal, and we sort of renewed our friendship. And he was a much older man, and we all figured he was dying. He had cancer. I think it was cancer. We knew he had some incurable disease anyway, and he was dying. And he used to come, and we had the best fun with him, and we had a lovely time. And I thought it was quite strange. I was there right at the beginning, and I was there right at the end.
Harold became a friend of mine and quite an influence in my life throughout my career. In fact, he wrote the script of Remains of the Day when I came back into acting. We became friends of he and Antonia, and of course, when I came back into acting, he'd written the script of French Lieutenant's Woman, which I nearly did.
From the first, he was using 3 dots, which are a hesitation, pause, which is an emotional stoppage, a transition, and silences, which are complete crises.
And I remember him saying to Beryl and I want you to count 15 before you say that next line. And Beryl, who was a superb comedian, would say, oh, don't be ridiculous, darling, you know, we're never going to laugh.
I mean, shouldn't we decide where the pauses are when we know how the scene goes? And I would say, absolutely not. You have to understand that the pause is there because it actually is a line.
But of course it worked like a charm, because what it was constant repetition. I think that's the night bus, the long pause. The night bus will be along in a minute.
You thought, how brilliant, because the man is a genius at almost capturing a kind of the little detail, the idiosyncratic detail of speech.
Ordinary speech, everyday things that you overhear, and he turned it into a little piece of art.
Even when they've heard you, they repeat it again. And it gave a life and a rhythm and a musicality to his work.
And made you love and admire these people and realise that the language they use is poetic.
I think he just wished he'd never written the word pause in a script because he became known for it.
He said how he hated being saddled with this pause thing.
Just ignore the pause if it doesn't feel right, boys.
And I can remember, I think, playing Moonlight and saying, what do? Should I pause? And he went, no, get rid of them. Pauses, get rid of them.
What surprised me was that we never did need to ignore the pause because it had always been perfectly placed.
Harold had this untrammeled access to his subconscious. So unlike anyone else, if you and I were to write, well, certainly if I was to write, I would write and then look at it and then improve it. And then think of a better word, and he just left it alone. So he trusted his instincts in the way nobody else I know did. So what was on the page, you then was often revelatory to him as well as to us as you explored it.
We loved Kafka because he reflected and exposed our vulnerabilities.
And I think there's a lot of the early coward stuff where people are behaving and being very, very civil to each other, while underneath it there's these great storms of emotion going on.
Even Arthur Miller's first plays, Death of a Salesman, the poor victim. I think the victim psychosis is prevalent almost exclusively in Jewish writers.
It's actually highly honed and very, very theatrical. It just seems so experimental.
His characters are never, and they are not, absurd. The idea that he belongs to something called the theatre of the absurd is preposterous.
My feeling as an actor is you shouldn't get in the way of the play. So I can't stand interpretation in Shakespeare or in Pinter or in anything. I think you just have to not get in the way and try and let the play out. So, which is just about the hardest thing. And of course, you don't win any awards if you do that. You know, the way to win awards is to get in front of the play and show off your acting.
I think it's my duty as a man, and certainly my duty as a citizen, to try to define my terms as precisely as possible, therefore to speak as clearly as possible.
It's difficult because I have a sort of horror that there's going to be, since he's died, a sort of rash of over-emotional productions, really. You know, I'm sort of planning to try and keep the flame alive, that people don't... There isn't with the young actors that you have all this in your larder and you have all this emotion, this psychosis that I was talking about before, but then you sit on it and try not to let it show, and then the play has impact.
He examines the kind of back alleys, and that's really very, very clever. And of course, this is what Beckett always did, even writing about some poor old lady in a big pot or a couple of tramps under a tree. Their thoughts and feelings reveal more about the character of the world, the character and state of our mind, than, oh, it's a play about Michelangelo or, you know, blah, blah, blah.
Pinter said something about not letting your plays
ask the questions sort of externally, so they have to speak for themselves. You can't make your characters say what your play is thinking.
Why I love him is so exact and says one thing that somebody else would say in 50,000 words because it's the stream of ideas and dreams and everything.
I love his dialogue because I love the rhythm. It's so rhythmic, so that to me is complete.
Yeah.
It is flow, the same way Joyce has that rhythm.
It wasn't just for shock value. Occasionally you go to the theatre and you think, oh, that's amazing, that's something new, but it won't necessarily last.
But the modern writers do not have a victim. There are no victims. They have society that they can expose, can, castigate, investigate, but there are no victims.
Harold Pinter became a kind of brand name.
People have tried to copy him, but nobody's quite managed it.
That quality of Pinteresque, that musicality, is the keynote to him. And I think when he went away from that, I think we lost some of that quality.
I mean, he certainly adored women. I remember we had a long conversation about one of the greatest sounds on earth being the swish of stockings underneath, silk stockings underneath a skirt. And, and the click of a woman's heels.
The torturing of minds that can go on between men and women and men and men.
But I suppose I've heard people say that he didn't write as well for women as he did for men, and I think that's probably true. Although all the women I know, Lindsay Duncan and Leah Williams, they adore him.
He never has talented and beautiful women in the plays. They're all sort of mumsy and that.
The middle plays and towards the later plays, complex insights into the way women are manipulated by men and the things they're forced to be.
But I don't think Pinter actually does repress women or play with the kind of I'll make them submissive, because I think although he doesn't have that many female characters, he kind of boxes them as much as he does with men.
He understood the kind of sexual drives of men and the sexual thoughts of men in a very real way, which he surfaced, and other people have been more inhibited about it, but he wasn't a little bit afraid.
Oh, I don't think men understand women at all. No, I don't. But then I don't think we understand men at all, really. I think I do, because I'm very, very old. But when you're young, you don't.
Harold did write poetry. And, it's been said by many people, and I think one of the great poets in America, Wallace Stevens, that the imaginative transformation of life is the purpose of art. So I think that Harold's imaginative transformation of life is an acid exposure of the moment of tension of people meeting.
What sound was that? I turn away into the shaking room. What was that sound that came in on the dark? What is this maze of light it leaves us in? What is this stance we take to turn away and then turn back? What did we hear? It was the breath we took when we first met.
I think in Antonia, Harold met a woman who was as brainy as he was. She was a real pistol. She was the ideal wife for Harold. She could keep up with him.
And he said something about he'd never managed to write a happy play because drama was about chaos and disarray. But he'd managed to live a happy life.
Somebody said, do terrorists imagine what they do when they leave a bomb, which then explodes? Do they imagine what actually happens at the other end to the people? And my immediate thought was, do countries, states, if you like, governments, imagine the same thing? What do they think when they drop bombs on cities, which are simply statistics?
Very sharp and very, very serious about his work and what he believed, and very, very serious about his politics.
Break a few windows. And he tried to do this in all his plays. They became more sophisticated. But as they became more sophisticated, they lost a little bit of that Pinteresque power. So what he did instead He would throw grenades at the public.
I think he was always passionate about things, and it was just a natural thing for him to speak out in a different way.
And he didn't need to do it so crudely as to put it into his art. He could just speak about it.
The great place to be is to not know anything. The great place to be is when you can't talk about it. It's lovely to talk and articulate things, but what it's all about is the hidden pain, fearfulness, the unknown. That's what Harold is brilliant at capturing. Whether it's a torturer in some South American country, whether it's in the Wimpy Bar down in Whitechapel.
I suppose I do feel that he has an absolute emotional horror of bullying, whether it's of nations or of people. And that those power plays between people, or whether they're men or women or jobs or work or whatever, or whether they're fair and unjust, are extremely interesting to him.
The terror that's waiting around the corner, the manipulation of truth.
The United States has actually, in my view, and this is based on fact, got away for many, many years with a foreign policy which is very cruel and has been responsible for death, imprisonment, torture of hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people.
I remember once I went round to his place and he said, "I've just written a poem." This isn't long ago. And I said, "Oh God," and the same sort of terror that you get when people tell me a joke, I always think, "Oh my God, am I going to laugh at the end or not?" And he went, "I'm going to read it to you." And he went, "And so it goes. And so it goes on. And so it goes on. And so it goes on. And so it goes on." And then a sort of rising tide of hysteria started to come inside me, and I thought, oh my God. And there was a long pause, and he said, "And so it goes on. And on." And I thought, what am I going to say? And he said, "And on. And so it goes on." And there were always these moments with Harold where, you know, he always took the mickey out of himself about the shortness of his poems or all that kind of thing, while at the same time writing these. And I said, I think I said something like, "That's terrifying." And he went, "Yeah, good."
Apart from the known and the unknown, what else is there?
I'm afraid I'm the wrong person to ask.
But you're a philosopher. Come on, be frank. What do you make of all this business of being and not being?
I stopped believing in organised religion, shall we say, quite simply, at a very early age. And I've never looked back, really.
He gave a party the night before he was going to have this horrendous operation, and had many wonderful friends in the garden, and he was incredibly brave. And he was going around the garden and telling everybody, "I'm going to die tomorrow, I shall be dead tomorrow," and all this was going on. He said it to absolutely everybody. My wife said, "I'm going to pray for you, Harold." And he looked absolutely shocked.
That was Harold's nature, as being an inflexible kind of pragmatist, if that goes together. Anything that couldn't really be significantly proved or have an impact in a direct way is mystery and mysticism, and he wasn't into that.
When Harold said he didn't believe in God, I didn't believe in him.
He was too much of a humanist. He respected human beings. He knew about suffering so much. He was exceptionally brave.
For a start, Harold was a Jew, and they have an extremely strong religious upbringing.
I think God wouldn't come into it, and I know he even boasted that when he studied for his, what they call his, bar mitzvah at 13, when it was, when you become a man, after that, he said, I took no interest. But nobody did, really. I mean, no Jewish boys took, very few, unless you're going to be a rabbi.
I met a few who believed they were God, but possibly Harold is one of them. That's the thing. That's what it was. He didn't want any competition.
First of all, it's brought to you via an obscure language of Hebrew. After that, when somebody gave him books to read, he, relished his own language, and he had no time for the archaism of religion.
Well,
I knew Harold Pinter mostly from playing cricket with him, because I used to be captain of the Guardian cricket team, and every year we used to play Harold Pinter's 11. And he always used to put some amazing West Indian fast bowler against us, who would smack us in the chest at about 90 miles an hour. But we often managed to beat Pinter's 11, somehow or other.
A chaotic, fragmented world in which I was brought up. The one thing that was really stable was cricket, which I thought was a thing of beauty and a joy forever, you know.
Lady Antonia came up to me, because she knew I was the captain, and said, "Do let him win this time, because if he loses, he gets really upset."
He was very opinionated, and he annoyed a lot of people. I seem to sense he had a messianic zeal, a little bit, which is a very Jewish thing, because all mothers want their sons to be the Messiah.
I felt somebody rather poised, rather difficult, rather arrogant, rather contained, rather clipped, rather derisive, rather sharp.
He put people off who were his allies.
He was quite formidable when talking about his work to young people, I think, and people were quite frightened of him.
Would you like him?
I don't know whether I'd like him, but I think I'd like to have a cricket net with him and maybe chat about his plays.
I'd like to meet him like accidentally, where you weren't meant to be talking about theatre.
I think it'd be really interesting to meet. I think it'd be very clever, and I think it'd be really funny as well. Yeah.
I think he's probably very scary and intimidating and doesn't suffer fools gladly. But he seems really sharp and really clever.
Well, I don't think he'd like me, actually.
Why don't you think he'd like you?
Because I think I'm too, like, hi! And I think he's much more thoughtful.
I think he'd be fascinating to meet. I don't think he's the sort of person who necessarily likes people, though. That's the impression I get of him, because I always feel somehow his characters are sort of watched, but he's slightly distant from them.
He's watching for the scumbags and the needy from the greedy all the time, all the time. You know, that articulate eye that he had that stopped people getting away with bullshitting.
I've been incorrect, and he likes correctness, and he wants you to be accurate in what you say. Don't come out with kind of anything just to make chatter.
I said, there's no need to have a go at the stage management. It's not their fault, you know, they're doing their best. And he went, "Don't tell me what I need. Don't tell me what I need." And I said, well, there really isn't any need to have a go at her, because there's not anyone. And suddenly he stood up and was taking off his jacket, and I thought, oh my God, I'm going to have to headbutt Harold Pinter in the first, you know, my first job with him. How am I going to tell my parents about this?
And ironically, Harold was wonderfully warm, but the carapace was tough.
But at base, once he knew you, he was terribly friendly and not at all pompous. If he didn't know you, sometimes it was a little bit difficult to get to know him.
He was a very good friend. He's the sort of friend you want to have. He kept in touch.
He would write to me and very often send me a poem, a very charming poem, and, you know, which was quite an expression of some kind of either political, emotional commitment, and send me little, you know, jottings saying, you know, what, this is just for you, what do you think of it?
He's a serious man. I like people who are serious about things.
I just absolutely loved his certainty.
And he would have continued had he not made money like that. He wouldn't have changed himself, because that's what he did and that's what he wanted to do. Money would not have affected him. I'm sure of that.
He was so avaricious, such a learner, I think. And it was exciting to be around this man of strong opinions. I didn't always agree with his opinions, but he had opinions and he wasn't afraid to share them. So I think friendship for me meant you could have a real conversation with him.
Not, God, I'm lonely and I'm lost and I don't know what the world's all about, but I have an opinion, I know what I want, I think this stinks and I think that hurts and I do, and women shouldn't be like this and men should be like that and fathers are idiots and da-da-da. But how do you have all of these opinions, passions, articulacies, strength, physical strength, dynamism, sexual attractiveness, and pretend to be English and not know and obey all the codes of English life? You write the fantastic plays that he wrote for 30, 40, 50, 60 years.